these types of strategies have an incredible failure rate, right? And where they typically fail is they fail on the ambition. People let go of the ambition so that they can deliver something that's close to being on time, on budget, but they let go of the ambitious nature of it. So we wrote this book for senior leaders and the teams that serve senior leaders in how to actually lead this type of endeavor.
Welcome to the Think Like Amazon podcast. This is your backstage pass into the principles and processes that have powered one of the world's most influential companies. I am Jorge Luis Pando. I'm an 8-year former Amazonian with a passion for helping ambitious professionals grow their careers in a way that's both balanced and sustainable. Each episode, I will talk to leaders to uncover the insights behind their success. And more importantly, how you can apply them to grow your own career. If you're ready to think bigger, move faster, and build a lasting impact, you're in the right place. Let's dive in. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm so happy to have John here with me today. John Rossman is a former Amazon executive. He actually led the launch of Amazon Marketplace, which I dare to say that it's now the cornerstone of modern e-commerce. He was the person who led that. And ever since leaving Amazon, he became a 4-time best-selling author. He has titles such as The Amazon Way, Think Like Amazon, which coincidentally shares a title with this podcast, Big Bet Leadership. And now you can find one of his latest ebooks for free online. It's titled Rossman's Business Manifesto for Competitive Advantage, The Pick, the Lipstick, and the Playbook of Champions. We can maybe touch on that a little bit later, but it's great that he continues spreading his wisdom through writing. He's also very active on social. I followed your videos and your content a lot. John is also now a thought leader, speaker, digital transformation and innovation expert trusted by everyone from startups to Fortune 500. That was a long way to say that we're really happy to have you here today with us. I was thinking about all the possible things that we could talk about today, given all of your extensive Amazon background and knowledge, all the books that you've written focused on Amazon. But the latest concept that I've read from you is one that really caught my attention. It's on big bets. So I wanted to focus our conversation on that, at least to start with. And I wanted to focus on first the basics. Like, how do you define what is a big bet? What are the most common misconceptions that people have or leaders have around big bets? And maybe we can start there and then we'll see where we go.
Perfect. Well, Jorge, first, thank you for inviting me to be on. Great to reconnect. We talked a couple of years ago. And thank you for all the setup. So the book is titled Big Bet Leadership, Your Transformation Playbook for Winning in the Hyper Digital Era. And as you said, I took a lot away from Amazon. My books have never been about Amazon. They're about what other companies and other leaders can take from a place like Amazon to delicately apply into their business, into their leadership, into their strategy, into their culture. And one of the opportunities I had was to be the chief innovation advisor to T-Mobile for 3 years. My client was Kevin McCaffrey. You might know Kevin McCaffrey is the co-author of Big Bet Leadership. Kevin's job was to build a new incubation capability within T-Mobile. And this was a brand new kind of muscle set for T-Mobile, very successful company in kind of the pure on wireless space, but hadn't really incubated new capabilities beyond that. We took many of the practices from Amazon, from Think Like Amazon. In fact, they read that book and that's what led them to reach out to me. And we reverse engineered them, incorporated in some other practices to build a purpose-built approach for them in order to explore new capabilities. And during the pandemic, when I was kind of thinking about well, what's next? I was like, man, that is such a powerful story of how to pursue high ambition, but high risk new business concepts I decided to write a book about it. I outlined what the book was. I sent it to Kevin, who at that point was running strategy within the Google Ads business. And he called me back. He goes, man, I've been waiting for you to do something like this. So that's a little bit of a wind up to answer your question, which is a big bet. They get called many things within a company. They get called a growth strategy, a acquisition, an AI strategy, a digital transformation, a growth strategy. Like any of those things can be a big bet. But at the end of the day, here's what a big bet is. A big bet is any plan or strategy that has these two elements at it. First, it has high ambition. It is not an incremental situation. It has high ambition for fundamentally changing a business, being something substantially new. But it also has this. It has high risk, high dependencies, high assumptions, high unknown unknowns about it. These types of strategies have an incredible failure rate, right? And where they typically fail is they fail on the ambition. People let go of the ambition so that they can deliver something that's close to being on time, on budget, but they let go of the ambitious nature of it. So we wrote this book for senior leaders and the teams that serve senior leaders in how to actually lead this type of endeavor.
So interesting. What would you say are because the name Big Bets makes it feel like you said, a risk, right? I'm taking a risk here, a big bet. What would you say is the most common misconception that leaders might have around like big bets versus normal bets, I guess?
Well, it's kind of a big bet versus a well understood investment or project or something like that, right? And so I think the biggest conception is that a business doesn't need a big bet. And actually, our whole thesis is a company always needs a portfolio of concepts that you're exploring. You may not be going for them, but you're exploring, you're considering these things. And that portfolio can have, many different attributes against it, from kind of, incremental to slightly more than incremental to actually something fundamentally different. McKinsey has kind of this 3 horizon model: horizon 1, horizon 2, horizon 3. That has more of a time phase element to it. But I think one of the misconceptions is that you don't need big bets in the business. It's demonstrated that bold moves, these types of endeavors, are the only way to take a company from kind of medium performing within their peer group to high performing. You have to have bold moves in a company. But again, there's a right way to do them and that there's a wrong way to do them. Part of my hesitation on this question is like, there's lots of misconceptions about this and lots of errors that happen. So I just talked about one that I think is a major one, which is I don't need big bets. The other big thing that happens is that company falls in love with one idea, right? And they make big commitments to it. They pursue it, but they really don't understand. They haven't de-risked it. And that is another type of failure. We talk about a few examples of those in the book. And I think GE and their Predix platform is a classic example of where, they had this general concept of a platform for IoT data and machinery data. But they never really got granular in what problems does it solve? Who does it solve them for? What is our unique position and value proposition to this? What are the assumptions that we are making in order for this transformative business to happen, and then go about an experimentation path through that? Instead, they just committed. And I mean, they committed not only in the spend and the team they put against it, they committed big to Wall Street against this endeavor. And they had no basis for any of those kinds of projections. But that's what happens is oftentimes a company, they get a little desperate. They fall in love with an idea and then they go big. And so these big bets, and then there's all sorts of execution challenges that happen. So the book proposes a framework for how you need to pursue these types of endeavors. And that framework is based off of 3 critical habits that are needed in senior leadership for these types of endeavors relative to kind of their normal operational things. So all of this is based on we are focusing on these high ambition, high risk situations. And those 3 habits are we have to create clarity, we have to maintain velocity, and we have to accelerate risk and value testing, deferring big commitments. So that is kind of the basis of the book. And the book then explores how to build and use these three critical habits.
That's so great. I think it's so important to emphasize. And I think the biggest learnings that I took from Amazon is this subtle differentiation between falling in love with solving a problem versus falling in love with an idea, right? A lot of people, especially nowadays, they're jumping into AI and saying like, okay, we need to use AI, but we use AI for what? Right. And I think that's that point there. I just wanted to stress it because I think it's crucial.
I completely agree. Like in these, it used to be like we have a digital transformation strategy or we have an innovation strategy. And now it's like we have an AI strategy. But you have to fall in love with like what problems are we actually solving? You have to make sure that they're problems that actually make a difference, right? It's also easy to get distracted by small problems in a business. And so that's why, again, having a portfolio and exploring them fully, making sure that these are problems that matter. And they matter to your customer or your target customer, and they matter from a financial standpoint. They have to matter from a financial standpoint because at some point, these endeavors start consuming resources and you're banking against them. So this whole process is about exploring those attributes that all have to be true in order to actually make a difference to an enterprise.
So important. Most of our listeners are Amazonians or aspiring Amazonians or people who aren't Amazonians, but they like kind of
Yeah.
like thinking like Amazon, the Amazon way, all of the titles that we've already discussed, right? When I was reading the book, I couldn't help but draw a lot of resemblance with Amazon's working backwards and the way that we are taught how to operate there, right? How to start from the end and then started kind of like crawling our way back to the beginning. But based on all of your experience outside of Amazon with companies, inside of Amazon with all of the launches that you've made, what similarities or differences do you see with the concept of taking a big bet, maybe outside of Amazon, and how people do it with the traditional Amazon frameworks?
So we built this book from the first principles of working backwards, which is like how to write and debate these things out. And it's been more than 15 years since I left Amazon. And what companies need is they need a lot more prescription in like, so how do I actually write and debate one of these memos, and everything, right? At
Yeah.
Amazon, it's kind of second nature. So we got very prescriptive in the memos and the style of conversation that we need for this. One of the things I want to mention is we kept the book very tight. It's an easy read. It's a great listen, but you get a ton of free resources at bigbetleadership.com. We have a set of these memos. We have examples. We have a set of prompts that are out of this world that it actually facilitates your development of these memos. But the core memos we got very prescriptive on because companies outside of Amazon don't actually know how to do these things. And so, about the what sucks memo, which is the essential kind of working backwards. What's the customer? What's the problem they have? Make me feel it. Make me understand it. Make a proposal for what a killer feature is. Then the outcome definition memo. This is like proposes the outrageous future that needs to happen, but then identifies what are the critical things that have to be true in order to deliver this outcome. We have an outcome financial memo, which forces you to not just do a simplistic spreadsheet analysis of the business case, but forces you to recognize the inherent risks that are always in business case. And again, asks you to stack rank. What are the things that must be true to deliver this financial case? All of this sets you up for doing what needs to be done with this, which is a fast approach and an isolated approach to testing the critical things that must be true in order to deliver this outrageous future. And is it worth it? Many of it, in a lot of my experience of kind of agile organizations, while they do have good agile methodologies, they focus the testing on the wrong types of things. And it isn't really until the end that you test the critical things that must be true for your product, your service, your new thing to deliver. And what our approach does is it forces you to recognize and stack rank the critical things that must be true. Those are the things that you have to bring forward, and you have to do it at velocity, right? 3 core critical habits: create clarity. This is the technique. This first section around thinking and outcomes forces you to create clarity, but then the testing and the management is what forces you to help maintain velocity and bring forward risk and value testing before we make big commitments. So by the end of this exploration, it's actually no longer a big bet. It's just a good concept, and you've de-risked it so that you can proceed with a degree of clarity and confidence that you couldn't before. And that's the dual-sided opportunity of big bet leadership. Pursue ambition, but do it in a way that is safe for the organization and safe for the people and their careers that are participating in these big bets.
I think it's so important, right? Because with big bets, I think the book mentions a really high percentage rate of failure that big bets
Oh,
have.
it's outrageous. I mean, just look at what happens to companies, right? Like, they're essentially formed on one central tenet. They're entrepreneurial, they're eager, they have success. Then what happens? They slow down, they become risk averse, they become very incremental in nature. But I think where Amazon is one of the most unique companies in the world is that they recognize 2 playbooks are needed. I have to be both a world-class operator and have to be a continuous explorer, right? Big bet leadership is about that exploration capability that companies need. And you can see this through the failure rate of companies. And so these endeavors fail, companies fail. And it's only if you consistently explore a portfolio of big bets that is the proven way to keep a company not just alive. Like sustenance is really not an objective for me. How do you maintain a championship type culture and company? That's what Amazon is trying to accomplish. We can debate whether they'll accomplish or not, but that is what they are trying to do, is be not just a world-class operator within their existing businesses today, but to continue to pursue a portfolio of high potential endeavors. I think that's what's needed in most companies, because this age of change is only accelerating. So the subtitle of the book is Your Transformation Playbook for Winning in the Hyper Digital Era. What's the hyper digital era? Well, the hyper digital era is what we are just entering into. And it's the combination of not just AI, but other disruptive technologies. And it's the combination of not just disruptive technologies, but what I believe are 2 other mega forces that are going to shape our economies going forward. And this is a big factor in the US, which is the aging of our workforce, which is going to make available skilled labor a harder and harder commodity, and the committed spend of the government, which is going to force innovation and growth, is the only way out of this budget situation that we have. And those 3 mega forces tied together with a fuse of aggressive investors who've honed their playbook over the past 30 years of digital disruption, they are going to be looking to disrupt cozy companies in cozy industries. And those cozy companies in those cozy industries need to pick up big bet leadership and build a portfolio of things that they are exploring, because you have to be both active in this area, but you have to be a skeptic in this area. So we wrap up the book with the final piece of advice, which is to be an active skeptic. Don't ignore these mega trends of AI and disruptive technology, or pursuing productivity and new markets. But also, don't just buy into the hype of it either. You have to prove these concepts out before you make big commitments to them.
One thing that you just mentioned that really struck with me is this concept of innovation and operations, and how Amazon kind of like complements everything, right? In my experience, especially, I've left Amazon a year ago, but I've seen a lot of companies that want me to consult them into how to work more like Amazon. And they're like, okay, we'll hire this innovation team. And there's this detached from the business innovation team that's trying to apply like big bets or like new ideas, testing, experimentation, right? But I always think like how they need to actually be integrated. It is not like there's part of the company that thinks big and then part of the company that operates at a small level. It all kind of like needs to breathe kind of like this big bet mindset, right?
With I would slightly frame it differently, which is I think across where you're right is that across the company, everybody needs to be focused on how do we get better doing what we're doing, right? So there is a degree of precision, high standards, and innovation across every operating team and capability. Exploring new businesses and essentially that framing of kind of eat the young, eat your young, and everything. That actually needs to be a separate team for a variety of reasons. One of which is just focus, right? Like maintaining velocity is the second critical habit. You don't get that if you're both have a day job and we're exploring. You can participate in big bet, but you can't be the core big bet team. But the other is just, incentive systems and orientation to like, well, of all my goals I need to hit, what tends to happen is, teams and leaders are like, okay, well, we'll deliver against today versus the job to be done in exploring these big bets. So there's a skill set in exploring these big bets that is needed. But what you're getting to is like across the organization, again, we should have high standards. We have to use metrics as to find the signal of where we aren't good enough today, where we aren't hitting our promise to our customer. And we have to have the skills and the capability to continue to improve and innovate relative to that. And that leads to an extremely healthy business in today. And so that has to be there. But this is an and you have to have a portfolio of like new disruptive ideas that are going to fundamentally change a business. And so, that's the and that's needed. So you mentioned earlier a manifesto that I posted last year. You can find it free online. Just Google John Rossman manifesto. It's called The Pig, the Lipstick, and the Playbook of Champions. That book brings together these elements that you and I are talking about, which is kind of like mission, culture, and leadership, operating a great business today and having kind of this quick cycle innovation approach and having a portfolio of concepts of big bets. That free manual, and it kind of tells my story a little bit and everything, kind of pulls all of this together.
I think that's very interesting information for people who are trying to build this. So kind of like, if I understood correctly, and please, if I didn't, just correct me so that everybody gets this clear. But one thing is kind of like a big bet mindset, and the other is the actual work that needs to happen in the sense of like owning a portfolio of big bets. That should be done by a specific person. If you're hiring for that person should be very big on innovation and stakeholder management. But then the mindset as a whole, the ideas and all of that do need to come from the overall team or organization.
That's right. Across the organization, just not settling for today is good enough. How do we always be improving against that? I think that's one of that relentless nature. Remember like relentless.com resolves to Amazon, and everything, right? And the message there is that we are going to be relentless upon improving how we do things today. That's an operational excellence and innovation capability that should be threaded across the entire organization.
Great. The book also talks about scripting the moves, right? Could you help us walk through how the scripting the move looks like? If you want to use an example of your real life, feel free to. But I want the listeners to kind of like get this concept of, okay, I have this big idea. Let's say, how do I script my moves?
Yeah. So scripting the moves is really a dual-sided concept in big bet leadership, which is both the exercise of planning things out, like actually like play forward, at least for kind of the proximal objective, right? Like, so I think of like, you have a big moonshot, ambitious thing that you're doing, but let's talk about the next 90 days, 180 days, something like that. That's a proximal objective. You should have a really well-defined proximal objective and then script the moves, outline like, okay, what are the things that have to happen to get to that proximal objective? What are the assumptions we're making? What are the dependencies? What are the risks? Spend time planning that out. Even though we know that plans will change, especially on these types of things, you are always better off, not just because you are actually scripting the moves and you're thinking through this, but your ability to then communicate to others. This is the journey we're going on. So this is the second aspect of where script the moves is helpful, is to the right stakeholders at the right level. You need to tell them about the journey that we're going on. So you're not only going to communicate, here's the vivid problem we are solving, and here's our hypothesis for what the future state is. You're going to be able to talk about the journey in a sincere, helpful way that helps everybody at whatever orientation or role they play in this change. They better understand the nature of the calibrated risk that we are taking here, right? And that is what scripting the move is about. It's about equipping you to have the precision communication that is needed in with your stakeholders to help them do their job better. Of all of the superpowers that I saw from Jeff Bezos, I think it's his ability to not just set his own communication to a ambitious but descriptive layer, but he forced that across his senior team. Like we wouldn't get away with inaccurate, vague, fuzzy notions of like what we were doing. You had to be able to, in a clear way, and clarity is an important word. Clarity is both precision of thinking and simplicity of communication. You have to be able to clearly be able to articulate, here's where we're going, and here are the moves that we are going to be able to get to along the way, and here are the risks that we are likely facing. When you communicate in that precision, repetitive motion, then again, you bring everybody along with you in the right way so that you're not doing this alone. You are syndicating, you are bringing others along to help them contribute to this in the right way. Stakeholder management is, if you think that that's important in general business, it goes to X importance in these big bets. You have to bring along the rest of the senior team and their teams along with this big bet and make sure they understand the problem, the ambitious future, and the journey, the scripted moves we are taking along the way. That way they actually can do their role relative to that better.
And that relates a lot with the concept you mentioned at the beginning of our conversation around the unknown unknowns, right? I always resort to that concept. For those who aren't familiar, we have the known unknowns, are the things that we know that we don't know, but then we also have the unknown unknowns. And there's this concept with taking kind of like thinking big or taking big bets, that we start the journey and it's all kind of like aspirational. We do our planning and we always tend to have this optimism bias, right? We don't always tend to underestimate the roadblocks, overestimate the accomplishments or the time that we're going to take doing things, and then things happen, right? So in your vision or in your framework of big bets, what would you recommend to folks as they have their big bet, they have their vision, they're going through it, they're communicating to their stakeholders? When do they know, or how do they know when to pivot versus change course versus just drop everything and go to the next project in the portfolio? How do you see that happening for folks?
Yeah. Great question and great setup. The first thing I'd say is sometimes this concept of the unknown unknowns is used as a way to allow for lazy risk understanding, right? It's like, oh, it was an unknown unknown. Well, actually, if you had done a better job of thinking through, as we've described, kind of through this memo and debate process, you would better understand the known unknowns, and you would have been able to stack rank those critical factors, and you would have been able to create a test of some type in order to flush out and make that known unknown into a known known, and then you're able to better proceed on it. So don't allow for too many unknown excuses, but there are unknown unknowns, right? Like, so no doubt they exist and everything, but the goal is to go from unknown unknowns to known unknowns to known knowns. And that's what experimentation is about. But you bring apart a critical part of this journey, which is like the high stakes meetings where we decide like, okay, we are where we are. It's either going really well, it's going okay, or it's not going to plan. How do we manage those things? So I think maybe my favorite chapter in the book is the chapter that's called, you think I'd be able to continue, kill, pivot, or confusion. And it's specifically about how to run these high stakes meetings because there's no given framework for how to make the decision or when to make the decision. The failure point is that we don't recognize that we're going to be making a decision like this, and we don't run the meeting the right way. And so this chapter is a prescriptive approach for how to pre-plan, execute, and post-execute these types of high stakes meetings. Because again, the chapter is called Continue, Kill, Pivot, or Confusion. And the confusion option is what typically happens out of these meetings. Or we have these other biases that we're fighting against that prevent us from making the best, clear-eyed, calculated risk decision that is needed. These daily moments that are needed in order, like, this isn't an audit. This isn't to understand how we got to where we are. We are where we are. What have we learned? And what is the right thing for the enterprise relative to this investment, relative to all the other investments that we could make relative to this? And that is the job to be done in these meetings, nothing else. So you have to run these meetings in the right way and recognizing them, preparing for them, executing them, and then unloading from those meetings. Like, that's the job that has to be done extremely well in these moments.
I think that's critical. I was thinking about your experience and going back to that concept of unknown and knowns, or things that people usually oversee or tend to underestimate. You've consulted to many companies, large and small. What do you think are the most common misconceptions, underestimations, blind spots that people have or companies have when they're trying to start thinking or start making big bets?
I think you mentioned one, which is just optimism, and everything, right? Like they're not. I mentioned this concept of being an active skeptic. Like, be an active skeptic, both active, like we are pursuing this, but skeptical relative to it, and so just over optimistic on a number of things. And the second, and this really gets to the second of the critical habits, right? Which is maintain velocity. We all, start off this project or this program. Everybody's like, we're all in, enthusiastic. You'll get my best, blah, blah, blah. But what quickly happens, which is this big endeavor, this high ambition, high risk priority quickly becomes run like every other corporate endeavor or project. You have to maintain the velocity on these. And big bet legends that we talk about in the book, Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, John Ledger from T-Mobile, Satya Nadella, they do not allow these things to be diluted across the organization and to slow down. In fact, they find ways to speed them up. Speed kills. And so we have the entire section called the Big Bet Environment, which is about the things you do to set an environment that actually allows these big bets to succeed. And a lot of that is about recognizing that they are different. You need to have a different speed orientation to these things. For example, hiring policies or contracting policies or buying policies. All of those types of things are set up for a normal course of business where, what you're trying to optimize for is best price or, kind of fairness, perceived fairness in kind of hiring or whatever. When it comes to these big bets, that's not what we're trying to optimize for. What we're trying to optimize for is best talent and speed. And so you have to predict that these things are going to happen, engage with the stakeholders, HR, tax, legal, procurement, and help them understand, like, we're not asking you to change your policies. We are asking you to put the right policies in place for this big bet. And so then you're setting and negotiating an approach that helps you maintain velocity through these predictable things that are going to slow down the big bet. So that's the other thing. Like, when people are over optimistic, they aren't predicting the predictable things that are going to slow you down. Get out in front of them, create alternate paths. This is where senior leadership has to be willing to kind of bend the curve on these things, because these things need a different orientation to them.
Setting up the right culture is super important. Not only communicating to stakeholders while you're running your bets, but also I imagine there's a lot of work prior to that. like instill in this culture of innovation across some of the functions that you mentioned are traditionally or stereotypically the ones that
Y-
aren't that
y-
flexible, right?
one of the advantages of kind of this book, Big Bet Leadership, and this concept of big bets is we don't have to change the entire organization, the entire culture to be successful at a big bet. We just need to have the right culture for the big bet itself, and everything, right? And so it's actually an easier transformation because some things like driving a culture of customer obsession or driving an entire culture of innovation, like we got to bring the vast majority of everybody along with us. What I'm suggesting is an isolated, specific leadership approach for this set of big bets that we're taking. So if you think about it in terms of like, we don't have to change everything across the organization in order to do this part of the job well, I think it actually makes it a little easier. But what it creates is a lighthouse then of like, there's some things we can bring over to the rest of this business from how we are running and executing our big bets that can be extremely beneficial in other ways. But, one of my mantras is I want to avoid a transformation in order to get to the real transformation, and everything. Right. And so it's like, if everything says, well, in order to do this, we have to do these other things, like you'll never get to where the juice is on these things, right? Like you won't get to the high ambition. Part of my job, part of what this book does, part of the job of being a big bet leader is to avoid and figure out how to find fast paths to getting this done and avoiding the precedent transformations that have to happen in order to be successful at this playbook. And so we give a number of ideas and guidelines in order to do that.
That's great. And maybe this is shifting gears a little bit, but one of the things that I thought when I was reading your book was, how can I apply this or how can somebody apply this to their careers? I imagine you've had examples like that. I would love for you to share with us
Yeah.
a bad career.
Yeah.
How does it look like?
So I've had a number of people come to me and like, oh man, I'm applying this in the way I think about my career, my life, and everything. It's like, okay, like we did not write it for that purpose. I can see the aspects of that I think could be really healthy, but just don't hold me accountable. Like that wasn't why we were writing this book. It was for a business and the team that needs to do this within an organization, not a career. But I think to the point of, kind of forcing clarity and thinking about like, where am I at? Where do I want to get to? What is the reality of the current situation I'm at? What do I have control of? I don't have control of, but where do I want to get to? And then kind of, as we talked about, scripting the moves, getting to that, better thinking and planning about how you want to get there. And then ruthless day-to-day execution against that plan. I think that can absolutely be applied to a career. And if I think back in my career, I think it would have been, I would have maybe done some things or accomplished some things that I haven't if I had thought about it that way, but that just wasn't my orientation. But I do think that there can be an aspect, and I think the really important aspects of that, one that people don't think about is just understanding controllable versus uncontrollable situations and the realities of where you're at. And so if you really focus in on what do I have control of, you become much less of a victim. You become much more of an owner of like your own career. I've got two boys. They're in their mid-20s and in their career and everything. The number one advice I give to people early in their career is make it easy for other people to actually give you critical feedback. And too many people are, when they think about mentorship or getting advice, what they really want is kind of like a pat on the back, and everything, right? A coach's job is to actually give you critical feedback. That's how you get better, is by getting fair, balanced, actionable, but critical feedback relative to performance. Your job is to make that easy. People make it way too tough, too sensitive. What they really want is platitudes. That's not how you get better. Think about any team, any really good coach. what do? They pay attention to details and they give everybody, their star players, they give them, they're probably hardest on the stars, you know what I mean, right? That's what you want. You want, you want people being hard on you because that's what actually helps you accelerate your progress. So that would be my number one advice to people early in their careers. Make it really easy. Seek out critical feedback in your career, not just platitudes.
See, that's a great advice, especially for people starting their careers. I think they're looking up and saying, okay, I want to apply this. I want to think in big bets. I mean, there's a big portion of our audience who are individual contributors. So I think I pretty clear if you're a leader of others, of organizations, what you can do to kind of like implement this within your team. What happens for the portion of our leaders who are individual contributors, or of our listeners, sorry, who are individual contributors? How can they get started on kind of like making their companies or even their managers start implementing this big bet mindset?
Write things out would be my number one recommendation, right? All of this back to the first principles of Amazon of writing out the situation. And if you can clearly write, that means you can clearly think and clearly communicate. And so writing out, like, what's the problem today? What's my proposal to do? What do I think the future is? How do I need to get this done? Writing that out, even if you only do it for yourself, you're going to be a better problem solver. You're going to be able to better communicate that. You're going to think through things so much better. But then if you actually do that, start doing that as a team, right? Just think about the power, the exponential power of team. It's writing and debating. And then you start creating a culture. What was this culture called at Amazon, Jorge? It was called truth seeking, right? Like we push past the easy, comfortable answers or diagnosis of the situation, get to the real truth of it, right? Like we call it in Big Bet Leadership, the what sucks, like what really sucks here and everything, right? That forces us to be both critical thinkers, but honest communicators. And so my number one, like to get started on this at any habit, be a writer, man. There's a lot of like personal journaling and benefits to personal journaling. This is journaling for your business, for your career. Write things out and you will think better about them and you'll be able to communicate better about them.
It's super interesting how all of, or a lot of these podcast episodes end up with writing as what a lot of Amazonians take out. Like, I mean, English is not my first language.
I think it's about the combination of writing and debating so that you're clearly thinking and problem solving, and then metrics, right? How do you measure things is actually like, that's where this, oftentimes the signals come from, and being able to separate noise from the signal and metrics that truly give you critical feedback so that you know like where the opportunity is. It's that combination is so much of the habit from Amazon.
Yeah, I totally agree. As I was saying, like English not being my first language, I always kind of like shy away from writing. I know, and I currently coach a lot of people who have been for a long period of time at Amazon and they haven't written a single document. And I'm like, you're missing out, man. Like you're missing out on the experience. Like that's what
And even if you're not being asked to do it, even if you don't have the opportunity, just do it for what you're doing today. What's my plan for today? What's the problem that I need to solve today? And how am I going to solve it? Writing that out, even if you don't share with anybody else, will make you better. But guess what? It takes work. It takes discipline. It's like going to the gym. You don't see the results day one, and everything, right? Like you have to give it a year of constantly doing this and you will find that you think so much differently about situations because you're able to actually be a critical thinker and a critical communicator.
That's key. And what I was going to say is I was going to tie it to your point earlier. It is very difficult to receive tough feedback, but also it is difficult to give tough feedback. And I've always found that writing is a really good way of detaching the person from the idea. So people are more open to being critical and tough on a document that they are on a person who's speaking, right?
Best observation of today, Jorge, right there. Like that is absolutely true. Having something written out allows for others to be much more on point relative to, the critical feedback, and it more detaches it from a personal level. And it's
That's amazing.
to ask somebody, is like, hey, beat up this document. And that's how you should frame it. Like, you shouldn't ask them like, oh, would you give me feedback on this document? Ask them to beat it up. That gives me permission to be critical. That's what I mean by make it easy for people to give you feedback. Tell me the worst thing about this. Tell me where this is failing. Beat this document up. Man, that sets up a whole different level of getting the best from that person. You're going to get the best wisdom, the best thinking from this person that you admire that is in a more senior job. You're going to get a completely different level of borrowing from their expertise and experience than you do if you just like, hey, would you review this?
It's great. So writing things down, seeking tough feedback, thinking in big bets. John, it was a pleasure having you today. Would you share? I mean, I will put all of your socials in the description on YouTube and on all of the other podcast platforms. But do you want to share with us where can we best find you?
Yeah, I mean,
People want to read more?
LinkedIn is always super easy. John Rossman. I write a Substack newsletter that's for free called the Digital Leader Newsletter, johnrossman.com. So pretty easy to find me.
Perfect. Well, it was a pleasure having you, and I hope to have you again.
Let's do it.
Thanks.